Hello, ladies and gentlemen. The seminar will begin shortly, but before we begin, we would like to provide some administrative information. The seminar will be conducted in English and Japanese. Throughout the seminar, simultaneous interpretation between Japanese and English is available. Please use the interpretation icon, the globe icon, on the screen to switch the languages, or select
Throughout this seminar, simultaneous interpretations between Japanese and English is available. Please use the interpretation icon on the screen to switch the languages. また本日のセミナーの最後にはご参加の
At the end of today's seminar, we will have a question and answer session where the panelists will answer questions from the audience. Questions will be posed to the panelists anonymously. If you are participating online, please submit your questions using Zoom Q&A function. Please note that this seminar will be recorded by the organizer, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for public relations purposes. So please refrain from recording the seminar. Now, we'd like to start Asia Energy Security Seminar 2025, hosted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. My name is Nishimura. Yasuko Nishimura, Director of Resource Security Division of the Economic Affairs Bureau, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'll be serving as today's moderator. Today, panelists will discuss face-to-face, but the seminar is also streamed online. We'd like to thank many of those who have registered and are participating online. First, on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Director General of Economic Affairs Bureau, Hayashi Makoto, will give opening remarks. Mr. Hayashi, please. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hayashi, Deputy Director General of Economic Affairs Bureau of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking your precious time to attend Asia Energy Security Seminar today. On behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, the organizer, I'd like to say a few words at the outset. Asia Energy Security Seminar is held every year by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan to deepen understanding of Japan's efforts and international cooperation in energy security. This year, I'd like to deepen our discussion on how energy security might change or might not change in a world where a clean energy transition is going on. Today, the global energy security environment is becoming increasingly complex. In order to combat climate change, countries are accelerating the transition to clean energy and to achieve net zero emissions. Meanwhile, energy is a foundation for people's livelihoods and economic activities. So that we do not undermine the stable supply of energy, energy transition must be carried out in a safe and orderly manner. Securing a stable supply of traditional energy sources such as oil and natural gas will remain an important task. The Russian invasion of Ukraine caused the global energy crisis. And every time tension in the Middle East escalates, we worry about the impact on the oil market. So we must remain vigilant of geopolitical risks. At the same time, progress of clean energy transition gives rise to new challenges. For example, with the expansion of the variable renewable energy sources such as solar and wind power, safe and stable supply of electricity is becoming increasingly critical. Ensuring the safety of electricity infrastructure against the risks of cyber attacks and natural disasters is also becoming ever more important. In addition, critical minerals required for clean energy technologies, as we discussed in the last year's seminar, establishing resilient supply chains for critical minerals has emerged as an urgent issue. Energy transition is changing the environment surrounding energy security. Energy security today and in the future will require appropriate responses to both traditional and emerging risks. With the environment surrounding energy security at such a turning point, for this seminar, we invited 4 experts who are active on the front lines. to deepen the discussion on future issues and the efforts of the international community. I'd like to extend my heartfelt thank you to the panelists. I hope that today's seminar will provide an opportunity for lively discussion and deepen understanding of energy security today and in the future. I look forward to hearing from you today. Thank you very much for your attention. Deputy Director General Hayashi, thank you.
Now we'll move on to the first part of the keynote speech. The panelists will talk about in English, so I will switch to English. So if you utilize an interpretation service, please use the interpretation service.
Part of the seminar, we will hear presentation by each speaker. Each presentation will focus on different aspects or angles of energy security and energy transitions. The first speaker is Mr. Ronan Graham, a senior energy security analyst from the International Energy Agency, IEA. Mr. Graham joined the IEA in 2021 and since then has been providing policy advice to governments on energy security. Mr. Graham will give an overview of how energy security risks have been evolving while the energy transition progresses. As the IEA holds the Summit of the Future of Energy Security in April, this is a very timely opportunity to hear from him on this topic. So, Mr. Graham, thank you very much for joining us today, especially at an early hour in Paris. So now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. So thank you very much. So I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person in Tokyo today, but nonetheless, it's a pleasure to be speaking to you from Paris. And thank you very much to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan for extending the invitation to the IEA to be part of this event. So my name is Ronan Graham. As was said in the introduction, I'm a senior energy security analyst at the International Energy Agency. And in this presentation, I'm going to look at the evolution of both traditional and emerging challenges and risks to global energy security. I'll begin by discussing the evolution of the traditional risks and challenges to global energy security, and those particularly related to oil and gas markets. And those traditional risks, of course, remain as important as ever today. But then I'll move on to talk about some of the new and emerging challenges to energy security, including challenges related to the expanding role of electricity, and also some of the challenges related to the supply chains of new energy technologies and of critical minerals. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So this slide just shows a quote from the 2024 IEA Ministerial Communiqué, in which ministers responsible for energy policy in IEA countries reaffirmed that the IEA's foundational and central mission is to ensure global energy security. But if we move on to the next slide. And so here, this is really moving into the content of the presentation. And in these first few slides, I'm going to focus on how traditional energy security risks related to oil and gas supply may evolve in the decades ahead. And so on this slide, you can see two charts which show some good news for oil and gas security. If I take the chart on the left first, you can see that global oil production is projected to increase through 2030. And that will result in an increase in the level of OPEC plus spare capacity, which is a key indicator of oil market tightness. And in natural gas markets, we also see a similar story of reduced supply tightness. So although today gas markets, maybe particularly in Europe, may be fragile, things are going to change in the not too distant future. And that's because, as you can see in this chart on the right of the slide, a wave of new LNG capacity will become available from the end of this year into next year. And by 2030, we project that global available gas liquefaction capacity could be about 50% higher than it is today. So the key takeaway here is that we're probably going to have higher spare crude oil production capacity in the years to come, We're also going to see a wave of new LNG supplies before the end of this decade, and both of these factors will provide a buffer to at least some extent against potential future supply disruptions. And if we move on to the next slide. So this slide really shows that, unfortunately, what I just said does not mean that we can just relax about oil and gas security. In fact, very much on the contrary. So the risks to oil and gas supply remain very large. And one of the key risks to oil and gas security relates to the fact that a very significant amount of global oil and gas trade passes through supply choke points. I just mentioned that the OPEC plus spare capacity is likely to rise, but a very large majority of that spare capacity passes through the Strait of Hormuz, a major oil trade choke point. And if there was a disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, most of that spare capacity would obviously be, rendered inaccessible. You can also see on the chart on the left here that the volume of oil that passes through the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca, another potential supply choke point relevant to Asian markets in particular, obviously, is projected to increase, and that exacerbates risk. And that exacerbates risk particularly for Asian importers, because as you can see then on the chart on the right, large Asian importers are particularly reliant on oil and gas supply from the Middle East, much of which passes through the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca. Of course, oil and gas disruptions can also be caused by many additional factors beyond disruptions in choke points. It's clear that geopolitical risk is very high today. Supply could be curtailed for a variety of geopolitical reasons. The risk of natural disasters impacting oil and gas supply is also very high. Even cybersecurity threats against oil and gas infrastructure pose a concern. So all of these factors combined mean that we must remain focused on oil and gas security and emergency preparedness. And then on to the next slide, please. So another factor that we must consider when we think about traditional energy security challenges to oil and gas supply is that there is a great deal of uncertainty around the future long-term outlook for oil and gas demand. So here in this slide, I'm showing our projections for oil and gas demand in two different IEA scenarios. The first scenario is what we call STEPS. It's the Stated Energy Policy scenario. And the second scenario is called APS. That's the Announced Pledges scenario. I won't go into the details of all the assumptions behind these scenarios here, but just in a broad sense, for you to know that APS assumes much greater global ambition and achievement on energy transition goals than STEPS. But what I really want to show here is just how different the two scenarios are. So there's a very big difference in global oil and gas consumption in 2035, and an even bigger difference in 2050 between the two scenarios. In STEPS, global oil consumption is only about 5 or 6% below what it is today by 2050, in 25 years' time. But in APS, global oil consumption drops by nearly 50% by 2050. And it's a similar story for natural gas. In STEPS, natural gas consumption in 2050 is actually higher than it is today. But once again, in the APS scenario, natural gas consumption drops very dramatically. So our approach to oil and gas security must take into account this very significant uncertainty around the future direction and the future level of oil and gas consumption. And we must be prepared for, I would say, all eventualities, including a future where oil and gas consumption is much higher than we maybe expect today in the decades to come. And if we move on to the next slide. So I would say one of the great challenges posed by this uncertainty around the future direction and the future level of oil and gas demand relates to ensuring that we adequately and sufficiently invest in oil and gas supply to meet our future needs. So if we cut investment in fossil fuels prematurely, that could exacerbate the risk of supply disruptions in the future. So we must be very careful about balancing investment in fossil fuels and clean energy. And here on this slide, you can see our projections of required fossil fuel investment and investment in clean energy in the two scenarios that I mentioned earlier, STEPS and APS. And in STEPS, the world will still require a very significant amount of investment in fossil fuels by 2035. And that includes investment in both new and more so, even more so, in existing oil and gas fields. And on to the next slide, please. So in this slide, I just wanted to sort of briefly highlight the impact and the extent of changes in the geographical concentration of oil and gas consumption. So the fundamental message of this slide is that it is largely emerging and developing economies which will be driving future oil and gas consumption growth. And because of that, those countries will be increasingly vulnerable to fuel supply disruptions. And so they will need to intensify their focus on fuel security and enhance their emergency preparedness strategies for both oil and gas supply disruptions. And then if we move on to the next slide, please. So in this slide, you can see an image of a major emergency preparedness exercise. And so this exercise is an exercise that we recently held at the IEA in November 2024. And this exercise is an exercise in which we gathered officials responsible for oil security from countries across the IEA family. And we ran a simulation of a major oil supply disruption and trained the officials who attended in how to assess and how to respond to such a disruption. And so given all the factors that I just mentioned before, these types of disruptions, events like these, will continue to be critical to prepare for fuel supply emergencies. So now I just want to move on to from talking about traditional energy security risks and talk a little bit about the new and emerging energy security challenges. So if we move on to the next slide, please. And I think there's a few iterations in the slide, so if you just do, I think, 2 more clicks, please. Thank you. So with regards to future energy security challenges, top of the list, I would say, for many governments across the world is probably energy security. And that is because we are undoubtedly going to see a very large increase in electricity demand in all regions over the next 10 years and beyond. And as you can see the extent of that growth in electricity demand in the chart on this slide. So global electricity demand could grow on average by 3% per year through 2035. So demand for electricity is growing faster than demand for all other energy sources. And that electricity demand growth is coming from both conventional uses such as heating and air conditioning, and also that electricity demand will be driven by to a considerable extent by newer uses of electricity such as electric vehicles, also demand from data centers, and demand driven by the proliferation of artificial intelligence. And then if we move on to the next slide, please. So that significant growth in electricity demand will require an enormous amount of investment in additional generation capacity. In our STEP scenario, we project a huge increase in production from variable renewables. So we will see a significant increase in solar and solar PV capacity and also in wind capacity. But there will also be a need for additional dispatchable generation capacity. Batteries and nuclear will play an increasingly important role here. But gas and coal-fired power plants will also continue to play an important role in many economies. Those dispatchable sources of generation will be needed not only to help meet increasing demand, but also to guarantee the security of supply, the security of electricity supply when generation from those variable renewable sources like wind and solar are insufficient. So that takes us on to the next slide, please. And so this next slide is about the need for increased flexibility options in electricity supply. So those dispatchable sources of electricity generation, thermal power, hydropower, nuclear, they will play a crucial role in providing what's known as flexibility. Flexibility in a basic sense means the ability to quickly increase electricity supply or to reduce consumption. And in order to ensure a secure supply of electricity in the future, a significant increase in flexibility will be needed. And you can see that on this slide. So in addition to dispatchable generation, flexibility will also be needed from demand side response, or DSR as it's written here. And so demand side response refers to the ability to reduce demand for electricity in response to economic incentives or price signals. And technologies like smart meters can help with that. And then if we move on to the next slide, please. So I'll just very quickly mention that alongside increased electrification and digitalization comes another big emerging energy security risk, and that is the greater risk from cyber threats. There've been an enormous, amount of there've been numerous high-profile cyber attacks on critical energy infrastructure in recent years, and as you can see here, cyber attacks in the power sector have risen more than fivefold in the past decade. In the interest of time, I won't go into great detail on this issue here, but cybersecurity in the energy sector as a whole is clearly now an increasingly pressing concern. And on to the next slide, please. So here I just wanted to talk about another emerging energy security challenge, and that relates to new and emerging energy technologies, clean energy technologies, such as solar PV, wind turbines, heat pumps, electrolyzers, battery components, etc. And the good news is that there has been a very significant expansion in manufacturing capacities for many clean energy technologies in recent years. In fact, manufacturing capacity of many of these technologies far exceeds actual deployment of these technologies, and that has resulted in a big drop in clean energy technology prices in recent years. But the major concern here relates to the fact that, just like fuel production, manufacturing capacities for clean energy technologies are highly concentrated geographically. And you can see here on this slide, solar PV modules, wind nacelles, battery cell production, they're all heavily concentrated in one country, and that country is China. And the primary reason for that concentration of production in China is that there is a large production cost gap between China and the rest of the world when it comes to producing these technologies. So China currently has significant control over these technologies and their supply. And although the production of some of these technologies may become less concentrated in the future, it is still likely that the production of these technologies will remain concentrated in China to a great extent in the coming decades. And then if we move on to the next slide. So that theme of supply concentration is relevant not only for the production of clean energy technologies, but it also extends into the supply chains of the critical minerals that are essential for the production of those clean energy technologies. And as you can see on this slide, the production of many of the key energy-related critical minerals are highly concentrated in just a few countries. Over 40% of mined lithium comes from Australia. Over 60% of cobalt mining comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and over 80% of natural gas mining is from China, or natural graphite mining, sorry, is from China. That, of course, poses major concerns around the security of supply, because if there was an event that resulted in reduced production of any of these critical minerals from one of the major producing countries, it could lead to supply shortages of these minerals. And then if we move on to the next slide, please. So here I wanted to mention that not only is the mining of energy-related critical minerals highly concentrated, but the production of refined critical minerals is actually even more concentrated, and that's a key point here. And so on this slide, you can see that the refining of many critical minerals is highly concentrated, again, in just one country, which is China. And you can see here, for example, that for cobalt, graphite, and rare earths. Over 70%, and in some cases more, of refined supply comes from China. And on to the next slide, please. So just to finish the discussion around the security of critical mineral supply in this presentation, I should also mention that there are some concerns around the adequacy of supply for some minerals. For example, for copper and for lithium, demand could be significantly higher by 2035 than expected supply based on announced projects. So new lithium and copper production from projects that have not yet been announced will very possibly be required in order to meet the expected level of demand in the coming decade. And then the next slide, please. So I just wanted to very quickly mention that the IEA is in the process of developing a critical minerals security program, which will aim to address some of the key challenges that I mentioned before related to the supply of critical minerals and the related security concerns. And hopefully more information on that will be available in the coming months. And on to the final slide, please. So finally, I just wanted to highlight that international cooperation is very important to tackle energy security challenges. And very soon, towards the end of April, the IEA will host a summit on the future of energy security, as was mentioned in the beginning of this session. That summit will take place in London. It'll be co-hosted by the UK government, and energy ministers and other leaders in the energy world will be discussing potential solutions and areas of cooperation for tackling many of the issues that I've touched upon in this presentation. But with that, I'll end this presentation and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graham. It was actually a very comprehensive overview, starting from oil and gas, including its risk of investment gaps, and covering emerging issues of electricity security, cyber, and clean energy manufacturing concentration, as well as the critical minerals. So the challenges ahead of us look very complicated and maybe daunting, especially with your very kind of sophisticated charts. But we hope we will discuss more about solutions in the second part of the seminar later. So thank you very much. And now I would like to invite the second speaker. The next speaker is Ms. Jane Nakano, Senior Fellow, Energy Security and Climate Change Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Ms. Nakano is a very well-known expert on energy policy and energy security, including energy geopolitics. In addition, before joining the CSIS, she has experience in U.S. government positions, including in the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. So, Ms. Nakano, welcome back to Tokyo, and thank you very much for speaking to us today. Her presentation will focus on geopolitical issues. Understanding how geopolitical risks continue and evolve is critical for both energy policy and foreign policy makers. So this is particularly an interesting topic for us. Ms. Nakano, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me just make sure. Thank you so much, Director Nishimura. It's my pleasure to be back in Tokyo and really share my perspectives with all of you here. The transformation of our energy system is inevitable, I think, as we try to avoid the worst case scenarios, consequences of the climate change. And largely in advanced economies like the United States and Japan, but then also in emerging economies, governments and private sectors have pursued decarbonization by promoting electrification of various sectors, as well as trying to use the lower carbon energy resources, including natural gas. The increased deployment of non-carbon emitting technologies and lower carbon fuels is diversifying the energy mix. I think through this diversification, these technologies and fuels bring about energy security benefits as well as decarbonization benefits, and by strengthening the system resilience and providing optionality. However, this ongoing move towards a diversified and lower carbon energy system, or so-called energy transition, has not really freed us from energy security concerns. Our colleague from IEA has already spoken, really comprehensively, very informative presentation on many of the security challenges. And I'm afraid that some of my comments may overlap, but I wanted to sort of present, I guess, my way of looking at it as we talk more about the geopolitical risks that are associated with these energy security challenges. In my view, prior to this onset of the energy transition period, if you will, that we're living through, the energy security concerns were primarily tied to the access to fossil fuels. Ensuring the uninterrupted access to affordable oil and gas supplies was a top priority. Today, in the global energy system, with expanding share of low to zero carbon technologies, the notion of access really, is still there, but it's really, the focus is much more about, or expanding to be about, the technology components and their requisite minerals. And that really has become very much on the top of the mind for policymakers today. In other words, securing the supply chains for these technologies and also their requisite minerals has become part of the notion of the energy security. Also, for the increasingly electrified energy system, the security and resilience of infrastructure is a key energy security concern. The physical protection of critical energy infrastructure, such as the nuclear power plants, is not a new task to the governments and industries around the world. However, in the era of electrification, the resilience of infrastructure, such as transmission lines and supporting equipment, such as large-scale transformers, is an important task. Moreover, our modern electricity system is increasingly reliant on information and communication technology. Therefore, the risk of cyber attacks has become one of the paramount concerns. Cyber risks to the electric power system can come from direct attacks that are aimed directly at the infrastructure, as well as through an exploitation of vulnerabilities in the component supply chains, including by inserting counterfeits or malicious software, as well as tampering. So even while bringing about this energy security benefits through diversification of resources and technologies, the energy transition has not rendered the notion of energy security less relevant today, nor has the energy transition rendered the notion of geopolitics less relevant today. And I'd like to share some of the examples, countries and regions, and some of the energy security concerns now. So China's increasing assertiveness and the growing tensions with the West over priorities, norms, and principles underscore a geopolitical risk of heavy reliance on China for energy resources and technologies. China is dominating the global manufacturing of several clean energy technologies, as already explained by the IEA colleague. For example, China's share in manufacturing silica-based solar PV modules exceeds 70%, while China accounts for about 2/3 of global battery cell production. Moreover, China produces about 2/3 of alkaline-based electrolyzers globally. Electrolyzers are a key technology component for producing lower carbon hydrogen and ammonia. Furthermore, these clean energy technology components require minerals. Between 2017 and 2023, the global demand for lithium increased by 266%, cobalt by 83%, and nickel by 46%. According to the projection by the S&P Global, between now and 2035, the demand for lithium will increase by another 286%, cobalt by 96%, and nickel by 91%. And the global supply chains for these minerals are dominated by China, especially in the mineral processing and refining segment. And this dominance has become a leverage for the Chinese government. After a decade of relative peace, and it's all relative, but relative peace in critical minerals geopolitics, following China's unofficial embargo on rare earth supplies to Japan in 2010, critical minerals have become central to China's assertion of national interests and positions in the recent years. For example, China introduced export restrictions on certain gallium and germanium products in July 2023 in response to the US step to close the loopholes or workarounds China had found in US regulations that aim to limit China's ability to develop the artificial intelligence, or AI, for military applications. Gallium is important for the semiconductor applications, such as integrated circuit and quantum dots, while germanium is also important for semiconductor materials, as well as clean energy components such as solar cells. Since summer 2023, China has taken at least half a dozen major steps to restrict or ban critical minerals exports or critical minerals related technology exports, including rare earth magnet making technology. Additionally, with respect to the security of infrastructure as a dimension of energy security, the United States Homeland Threat Assessment that was published in October 2020 noted that China represents the top threat to the US supply chain security, given the sophisticated intelligence and cyber capabilities they can use to infiltrate trusted suppliers and vendors and target equipment and systems, especially through the information and communications technology supply chains. The most recent version, the Homeland Threat Assessment 2025 by the US government, that document alerts that the countries such as China, Russia, and Iran continue to seek access to or pre-position themselves on US critical infrastructure networks. The report points to the example of a Chinese state-sponsored cyber campaign known as Volt Typhoon that gained access to the IT environment of multiple critical infrastructure in such sectors as energy, water, and transportation. And now moving on to Russia. Russia has been and will continue to be a geopolitical risk factor. Russia is a major global producer and exporter of energy and natural resources, including oil, gas, uranium, and platinum group metals. Russia's full invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 illuminated the geopolitical risk to the global oil and gas systems that emanates from Russia. And I think already Deputy Director General Hayashi mentioned that a little bit, as well as I think the theme of the conference. But the effects on European economies are well known by now. An end to this war, or the ongoing process to bringing about the end to this war, may entail the relaxation or removal of some of the Western sanctions on Russia. That type of a development would likely improve the availability of natural gas to Europe and elsewhere, and also likely the energy prices may improve in the global market. However, it is highly questionable, in my view, whether the Western European governments would allow themselves to become dependent again on Russian supplies the way they were the pre-war. Russia is also a major producer of nuclear power generation technology components around the world. Today, the country's the leading exporter of the reactor technologies, accounting for roughly 2/3 of the globally exported nuclear reactors under construction. Today, there are about 440 nuclear power reactors operating in a little over 30 countries. And nuclear energy is gaining renewed attention due to its attribute as a non-carbon emitting source of electricity. At the COP28 climate meeting in Dubai in 2023, about 30 countries pledged to work towards tripling the installed nuclear power generation capacity through 2050. Almost 70% of the 440 nuclear power reactors in the world is in the advanced economies today. But the interest is rising among many countries, including in the global south, that currently do not have nuclear power generation program. Nuclear commerce entails not only a multi-year effort for reactor construction, but also an ongoing relationship between a supplier country and a recipient country regarding the fuel supplies and reactor maintenance over several decades. As such, nuclear commerce serves to create or maintain diplomatic, commercial, and institutional relationships. So there's quite a bit of there's a strong linkage between nuclear commerce and geopolitics that exists on multiple levels. In particular, the deep involvement of the government in the nuclear power sector makes it a much more sort of a geopolitically significant energy resource and energy technology than many others. It should be also noted that China is a rising power in this regard in the nuclear sector. China does not yet have a notable global export track record, if you will. It has exported to Pakistan, but that's the only sort of a market. But the country, China, currently has 30 reactors under construction. By 2030, China's nuclear power generation capacity could reach roughly 100 gigawatts, or about 100 reactor units, likely surpassing the size of the US commercial fleet of 94 units today. Also, Russia and China are key producers of nuclear fuel. Russia has roughly 44% of the world's uranium enrichment capacity, followed by China at 17%. Russia supplies roughly 35% of US imports for nuclear fuel. The global supply chains for nuclear fuel are vulnerable if there are geopolitical issues and instabilities that may involve Russia and/or China. The Middle East will continue to be also a key region to the geopolitics of energy. Many Asian economies, including Japan, have robust energy ties with hydrocarbon-rich countries in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. The emergence of the United States and countries like United States and Australia have helped with some diversification of sources, but the Middle East remains important. Consequently, the regional stability onshore and offshore, including the security of sea lanes and the navigational safety in choke points such as the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, continue to be geopolitical risk factors to our energy economy. Notably, some of the Middle Eastern countries could play an important role in the energy transition. For example, Saudi Arabia is an emerging stakeholder in the global supply chains for critical minerals. Saudi Arabia has been investing in its mineral resources, domestic processing capacity, as well as projects around the world, as the country seeks to diversify its economy away from the heavy reliance on hydrocarbon exports. Lithium, nickel, and rare earth, all important for low to non-carbon emitting technologies, are some of the minerals that the country is expanding its exploration and production efforts domestically. At its annual minerals conference in Riyadh in January, 2 months ago, the Saudi government announced a new mineral investment project valued at $100 billion, with $20 billion already in the final engineering phase or under construction. The emergence of Saudi Arabia as a new source of capacity and capital could potentially aid the Western effort to diversify the global supply chains of critical minerals away from China. At the same time, it could also reinforce the region's importance to the global energy system and the continued relevance of geopolitical risk factors, such as the sea lane security in the region. The Global South is, I think, often really underlooked, but the Global South is a key geopolitical force in the energy transition as well. Many economies in the Global South are home to the wealth of critical minerals that are important for the clean energy technologies and modern electricity transmission networks. As the advanced economies rush to secure these minerals, how they engage with the resource-rich Global South economies has geopolitical implications. In recent years, a few governments in the Global South have increased state control over their mineral resources to enhance the local benefits from the extraction. Some of the measures used are tax regime strengthening, royalty renegotiation, creation of state-owned mineral companies, nationalization of minerals industries, restrictions on foreign investments, and export controls. This broad banner of resource nationalism applies to this trend, although precise motivations may vary. Resource nationalism can be a risk to the global supply chains of critical minerals that are key to the energy transition. For example, a royalty payment dispute led to a disruption of copper and cobalt supply from the Democratic Republic of Congo for several months in 2022, affecting about 15% of the global cobalt supply. In particular, export restrictions on raw materials and minerals are a growing concern. According to the OECD data, export restriction incidences have grown by more than fivefold over the past decade. Export restrictions appear to be rising, especially for critical minerals. For example, in Africa, Zimbabwe, DRC, and Namibia banned the exports of unprocessed minerals such as lithium, graphite, and cobalt. Resource nationalism itself, or responses to resource nationalism, could present a geopolitical risk to the energy transition. These countries and regions and risk factors associated with their energy resource wealth or technology capacity do not represent the entirety of the geopolitical risk factors. We live in a remarkably dynamic time now, and a drastic change in US foreign policy and priorities constitutes geopolitical factors to be taken into account as one evaluates the nexus between energy security and energy transition in Asia and around the world, as we all strive to address the dual challenge of energy security and climate change. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to comments and questions later.
Thank you very much. You really illuminated how these geopolitical risks to energy security is evolving and getting complicated. And also, you stressed that the supply chain is becoming more important for the energy security. And it's actually a matter of economic security today. And I'm also glad that you mentioned the nuclear energy. We talk a lot about oil and gas and critical minerals today, but the nuclear energy also continues to be or becomes more important, as you mentioned, because the supply of fuel and technologies are concentrated here as well, and nuclear power is coming back across the world. So thank you very much for illustrating the nexus of energy security and energy transition with those examples. And now let me move to the next speaker. The third speaker is Dr. Nuki Agia-Utama. He's Director for Energy Policy and Head of Asia Zero Emission Center at the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, so-called area. His research area include energy policy, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. Before joining AREA, he served as the Director General of ASEAN Center for Energy. Dr. Utama, thank you very much for joining us today. We are very pleased to have a real expert from ASEAN because the energy consumptions in the regions are expected to grow, and the Southeast Asia will come to play more important roles in the global energy landscape. So Dr. Utama will present us on energy transition strategies in Southeast Asia. Dr. Utama, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Director Nishimura. Thank you so much for inviting me here. My name is Nukia Gautama from AREA, as mentioned by Director Nishimura. For today's presentation, I would like to telling a story on this, what happened in Southeast Asia, how Southeast Asia handling the issues of energy security, as mentioned by Nakano-san, including of there how the energy security can really combine together with energy affordability, as it is very important on proceeding on the energy transition. Next slide, please. Southeast Asia energy transition face a unique challenges due to its limited solar and wind potential. As seen on this potential graph, unlike regions with strong wind currents or high solar irradiance, the Southeast Asia region tropical climate, frequent cloud cover, and also low average wind speeds make these sources less reliable for large-scale energy generation. This graph showing understanding that over-reliance on wind and solar could lead to grid instability and also supply shortage, requiring alternative low-carbon solution to ensure a secure and sustainable transition. Given this constraint, Southeast Asia must adopt a diversified approach, integrating hydropower, bioenergy, geothermal, and also hydrogen ammonia-based energy alongside with solar and wind. To balance energy security and affordability, grid modernization, cross-border power trade via the ASEAN Power Grid, and investment in storage solution are very, very crucial. Apart from those, the region should also maintain the usage of hydrocarbons, including clean coal technology, gas, and also oil. Those renewable energy or cleaner energy we mentioned can be deployed without causing electricity price surge or economic disruption. And additionally, heavy industries like steel, cement, and petrochemicals need stable high energy density fuels, which means that exploring biofuels, hydrogen, and CCUS technology as part of the transition strategy is very, very important. A pragmatic country-specific approach is essential to avoid energy insecurity while achieving decarbonization goals. The region must strengthen regional cooperation, implement transition finance mechanism, and develop supportive policies that allow each country to leverage its most viable energy mix. And the future of energy in Southeast Asia is not about a single solution, but a flexible and resilient roadmap that balances sustainability, economic growth, and also energy security. Next slide. Our center just launched last year in August. We serve as a platform to serve and to share information, conduct studies on policies, facilitate stakeholders engagement, and help ASEC country partners to develop vision, roadmaps, and policies toward decarbonization to promote energy transition. Our strategy is including decarbonization roadmap, which serve as objective and practical reference points for setting targets, timelines, and identifying key drivers towards carbon neutrality. Second is a sector-specific, provide detailed insight into the key sectors and technologies essential for achieving decarbonization, focusing on power, mobility, and industrial sectors. Not to mention over there the cross-sectoral such as CCUS, biofuel, critical minerals, hydrogen, and also ammonia. And the last pillars is the market enablers, focusing on coordinating market structures so that necessary technologies can be evaluated properly and attract sufficient investment in a sustainable way. Our principle to achieve triple breakthrough, such as climate change, promoting inclusive economic growth, and also achieving energy security simultaneously, while adapting the concept of one goal, various pathways, recognizing diverse practical paths to carbon neutrality, net zero emission, considering each country's unique circumstances, policies, developmental challenges, geographical challenges, economic growth, and also technological issues. Next slide. In the energy transition, must be guided by data and grounded in objective and practical reference point. Drawing insight from IEA energy statistics, our work serves as a benchmark for setting ambitious yet achievable targets. The decarbonization roadmap provides a structured framework identifying key sectors and technology crucial for achieving net zero emission and focuses on area including the power sectors, which is strengthening renewable energy integration, modernization of the grid, and also ensuring stability through cybersecurity. Mobility, advancing electric vehicles, sustainable biofuels, and also alternative vehicles technologies. While it's on industrial sectors, promoting energy efficiency, sustainable manufacturing, and sector-specific carbon reduction strategies. Those including what we are currently doing on the cross-sectoral initiatives such as CCUS and also critical minerals. Next slide. The ASEAN Power Grid. The APG or ASEAN Power Grid is a transformative initiative designed to enhance regional energy security and enable a shift to cleaner power sources. However, the energy landscape of Southeast Asia is diverse, with many remote island and off-grid communities, and our strategies including modernization of the grid to accommodate renewable energy source while ensuring reliability, integrating smart energy storage solution to mitigate fluctuation in supply from variable renewable energy, establishing fair and transparent cost-sharing mechanism, especially for infrastructure and development, developing adaptive governance model that maintain regional coordination while allowing for national flexibility. As for island or off-grid energy system, we prioritize localized renewable solution, biomass utilization, and technical financial support mechanism to enhance sustainability and resilience. Next slide. The region automotive industry is on the brink of transformation. As we move toward 2035 and beyond, the region will experience a major shift in vehicle production and embracing hybrid electric vehicles and also biofuel to reduce emission in the near term. Expansion of the xEVs, battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and also hydrogen fuel cell vehicles as technology matures and infrastructure are developed. Sustainable fuel alternative, including e-fuels and advanced biofuel, to maintain a diverse and flexible transport sectors. Our study, including the ASEAN-Japan Next Generation Automotive Industry Strategy, which ensure that these transitions are supported by strong policies, investment in emerging mobility technologies, and also sustainable supply chains for key materials such as nickel and lithium. Next slide. Hydrogen and ammonia are rapidly emerging as game changers for industrial decarbonization and energy storage. Our activities and research including hydrogen and ammonia roadmap to evaluate supply and demand potential in long-term viability, biofuel and biomass supply chains for establishing sustainable sourcing strategies while balancing food security as a concern, natural gas as a transition fuel, enhancing emergency response mechanism and policy frameworks to optimize its role in energy security. Our work ensures that these alternative fuels are integrated responsibly within national and regional energy strategies. Next slide. Achieving sustainable energy transition requires financial innovation. Through the Asia Transition Finance Study Group, or ATF-ASG, we are developing financing solutions that support carbon market and sustainable finance taxonomies to drive private sector engagement, ESG investment that link financial flows with decarbonization goals, transition finance mechanism that enable a just and orderly shift away from fossil fuel, ensuring that developing economies are not left behind. And also, one most important activity currently we are doing with ADB METI area white paper, which provides an in-depth exploration of how financial, technical, and policy barriers can be addressed to unlock large-scale investment in clean energy. Next slide. With the Asia Transition Finance Study Group, the center of our activities, we are actively promoting stakeholder engagement by providing knowledge support tools and facilitating discussion forums. These platforms foster collaboration and knowledge exchange among key players in the region. Our ongoing initiative, including the ATF-AG and Transition Leadership Program, or TLP, and also decarbonization pathway development, which are referred in the ASEAN Transition Finance Guidance, issued by the ASEAN Capital Market Forum, or ACMF. This recognition underscores the importance of our work in shaping the region's transition finance landscape and advancing the decarbonization effort. As we look ahead, we must navigate our critical challenges in energy transition, including enhancing investment attractiveness, accelerating renewable energy deployment, strengthening energy security, and also managing high emission assets, which creating strategies to retire or transition existing fossil fuel infrastructure. With three core investment themes, green growth, supporting infrastructure, and brown to green decarbonization, we can mobilize capital, accelerate technology adoption, and also foster regional collaboration. Next slide. The ATF-AG is a private-led study group consisting of financial institutions operating in Asia and collaborating with relevant stakeholders across the world. The mission is to help achieve a just and orderly net zero transition in Asia by facilitating discussion and expediting the progress of transition finance to be implemented. This is the example of the partners involving on the ATF-AG currently that we are working on. Next slide. On the ADB METI area white paper, this joint paper explores a scalable financing mechanism and critical policy unlocks ASEAN towards achieving a sustainable energy transition. The paper will highlight the urgency of decarbonization, key challenges impeding progress, and necessary policy action to enable large-scale execution, and emphasizes financial, technical, and also policy-related barriers while outlining strategies to mobilize investment, enhance technology adoption, and also foster regional collaboration. Next slide. I think with this, I will conclude my presentation. We also having more than 500 discussion paper, 300 research projects reports, 104 policy brief, more than 70 books, and also 36 co-publication. Next slide. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Utama. Your point at the beginning that we have to pursue various pathways or tailored approach to the energy transition is very clear. We are all striving to achieve energy transitions and energy security and affordability together. But as you rightly mentioned, the conditions are different from country or region to region. But it's also encouraging that the ASEAN is taking a regional approach to regional collaborations for energy transitions. So thank you very much. And now the last speaker is Dr. Takafumi Yanagisawa, Executive Analyst, Gas Group Energy Security Unit at the Institute of Energy Economics of Japan, IEEJ. Dr. Yanagisawa has been working on global energy stations and Japan's energy policy in the IEEJ. Before joining the Institute in 2021, he also engaged on energy projects in the private sector. Dr. Yanagisawa is going to talk about energy security and energy transition from Japan's perspectives. So Dr. Yanagisawa, thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Ms. Nishimura. So now I would like to explain about the Japan's perspective on energy security and energy transition for about 10 to 15 minutes. So for considering this issue, recently approved the Japan's strategic energy plan provides us the important clue. So so this slide. Last month, the Japanese cabinet approved the 7th strategic energy plan, which updates the previous one made in 2021. The plan points out that energy situation surrounding Japan has changed dramatically since 2021. For example, a Russian invasion in Ukraine, the tension in the Middle East, and outlook for electricity demand increased due to the digital transformation and green transformation. And also the global expand of various and realistic approach to decarbonization, maintaining the ambitious climate goals. So in short, uncertainty is increasing for Japan's energy security. So next slide, please. And the plan also shows the basic concept for Japan's energy security. To cope with the uncertainty, Japan should prepare the various scenarios the plan suggests and provides the 5 different scenarios for energy demand and supply in fiscal year 2040. And even if the decarbonization technology like renewables, hydrogen, and CCS would not be advanced as expected, Japan should do everything for its energy security, including the long-term LNG contract to maintain the economic growth it suggests. And it also suggests that the renewables are vital, but required critical minerals have also supply issues, like uneven distribution of mining or oligopoly in the processing. And the plan suggests that then LNG is important as the realistic traditional fuel. This point can be seen also in G7 and ASEC statements, and I will explain more in detail later in different slides. So next slide, please. And this is the first reference slide. And this is the Japan's energy and power mix target in fiscal year 2040, the plan shows. And as you can see, the ranges for each energy factor could provide the flexibility for Japanese companies to procure the energy resources rather than the fixed target. And the above graph shows the energy mix target compared with the fiscal year 2022 actuals. And 5 different scenarios, but as you can see, basically all scenarios, renewable and nuclear increase, while oil and coal decrease. On the other hand, the natural gas decrease or increase in some cases. And the below graph shows the power mix target. And there are also 5 different scenarios compared with the 2022 actuals. And basically, renewables and nuclear increase and thermal decrease. But it is noticeable that there are no targets for each fossil fuels, like coal, oil, gas, which provides some flexibility. So next slide, please. And this is also for the reference, but a 2024 G7 in Italy statement about LNG. And there are sentences like font in red that the important law that increase the deliveries of LNG or publicly supported investment in the gas sector can be appropriate as a temporary response, and so on. Next slide, please. And this is the third reference, the ASEC and LNG. As Dr. Nuki mentioned, ASEC stands for the Asia Zero Emission Community, which started from the 2023. And this is the platform for cooperation towards carbon neutrality, net zero emissions in the Asian region. And it also stressed the importance of the various pathways toward the net zero. And the ASEC Leaders Joint Statement Action Plan for the next decades, announced in October last year, it suggests that depending on the national circumstances, the important role that natural gas and LNG will play as a traditional fuels as part of the wider efforts to deliver the goals of the Paris Agreement. So next slide, please. But LNG for Japan has also issues to address. Actually, Japan's LNG term contract volume will decline if without renewable or replacement, as the graph clearly shows. While the 7th Strategic Energy Plan assumed that the 54 to 74 million ton per annual LNG demand in fiscal year 2040, depending on 5 different scenarios, as I mentioned. And as you can see, there are huge gaps between the 2039 expected contract volume against the 2040 demand assumption in the plan. So next slide, please. And especially the Japan's LNG term contracts of Russian Sakhalin-2 are expected to decline dramatically since 2029 if without renewable. And Sakhalin-2 LNG is the nearest among Japan's import LNG. It only takes 2 to 3 days from Sakhalin to Japan. But if Ukraine war will continue, it will not be impossible but difficult for Japan to consider the renewable. And Japanese companies need to decide whether they will renew or replace the contracts during the US Trump 2.0 administration from the 2025 to 2029 in January. So next slide, please. And as you already know, there was recently the Japan-US summit and some agreement as to energy as well. And the joint leader statement announced in the February 7th this year regarding the energy mentioned that the two leaders announced their intention to strengthen the energy security by unleashing the United States' affordable and reliable energy and natural resources, and by increasing the exports of the US liquefied natural gas to Japan in a mutually beneficial manner. It also says that the leaders also welcome the effort to diversify the critical minerals supply chains and to collaborate on developing and deploying the cutting-edge small modular reactor and other advanced nuclear reactor technology. So next slide, please. While I also have to point out that there are pros and cons of Japan's increased LNG from the US. For pros, Japan's energy security could be enhanced by increasing the LNG from the United States as ally. Also, basically, US LNG does not have the destination clause, which prohibits the diversion, so it would make it possible for Japan, having the future demand uncertainty due to the nuclear restart, to pursue the demand aggregation with other nations like the JUSEP and ASEC also has the same concept. And ASEC, I already mentioned, and the JUSEP, it stands for the Japan-US Strategic Energy Partnership, which was implemented during the Trump 1.0 administration with Abe cabinet, and in which Japan and US cooperated to provide financial and technology support to like Vietnam and Philippines to make them LNG importer. While there are also the cons I consider, and the first, the US LNG from the Gulf of Mexico, now the Trump administration called the Gulf of America, but via the Panama Canal or Cape of Good Hope will take the longer voyage, like the 30 to 40 days to Japan, compared to the 2 to 3 days from Sakhalin I mentioned. And also, Alaska LNG, as other candidate, will take shorter voyage, 8 to 10 days, but a huge initial capex is expected, which could increase its price. So next slide, please. And this is the final slides and my conclusion. So every energy source has pros and cons and uncertainty, and LNG is expected to play the vital role for Japan's energy security during the energy transition, but it is not panacea. And second, every country as supplier has pros and cons and uncertainty as well. And Japan is expected to increase the energy cooperation with US as ally, but too much depend on the single one country could make Japan's energy security vulnerable. So therefore, Japan should continue to pursue diversification both for energy sources and for suppliers of each sources. And also, uncertainty surrounding Japan's energy security has been increasing, which is sometimes difficult to be solved only by the business activities. So the needs for Japan's governmental support and involvement have also been increasing. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Yanagisawa. It was very timely to hear your presentation just after Japan very recently issued the updated strategic energy plan. And I took two keywords from your presentation, uncertainty and diversification. Diversification has been the cornerstone of Japan's energy security strategy since the oil shocks. And you made the point that today's increasing uncertainty amplifies the need to diversify. So the very basic of a long-standing strategy continues to be important. And so thank you very much for your presentation. And with this, we conclude the first part of this seminar. And I would like to thank again all the speakers for excellent and very insightful presentations. And I would like to take 10 minutes quick break before we move on to the second part, the roundtable. And so, ではこれから10分間の休憩の後に第2部の
Okay, so now we will have 10 minutes break and we will start the roundtable part 2. And at the end of the roundtable, we will have Q&A sessions. And as I mentioned earlier, for those who are attending online, So you can write your questions in a question function of Zoom, and we will start at 3:30 in Japan time. So now we will have a 10 minutes break. Thank you very much for your attention.
So now we are starting the second part of the seminar, a roundtable discussion. I will have the honor to ask questions to the panelists, and we will try to leave some time for the Q&A from the audience at the end of this session. So my first question is about, we talked a lot about challenges and the issues we are facing. But we'd like to talk more about the solutions as well. And the panelists very clearly and insightfully illustrated how these both traditional risks are evolving, and both geopolitical issues and also the traditional oil and gas issue. And also they illustrated the new challenges like critical minerals and the clean energy technologies. And but we should now talk about solutions. And so I'd like to ask, say, maybe each panelist, what should we do or could we do to mitigate and prepare for the risks that we just talked about? Maybe you can't really cover all the risks because they are there are a lot that we just realized, and maybe you could pick one or two either traditional risk or risks or emerging risks, so evolving geopolitical issues as well, and maybe you could pick one or two or three, and then could you address what are the important measures we should take to address those challenges ahead of us? So maybe I would like to invite Mr. Graham because he has been patiently waiting online. Thank you very much. So then I'd like to ask each panelist to answer. So first, Mr. Graham, please.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I mean, first of all, maybe I'll mention traditional risks. And, as I showed in my presentation, ultimately, we can't relax about traditional risks to the security of oil and gas supply in particular. Those risks are evolving, but they remain very significant. If we want to talk about solutions to those traditional risks, I would say, in terms of measures to mitigate those risks, for oil, I would say, I have to say that the IEA's oil stock holding system and emergency response system will remain a critical backstop and continue to be a linchpin of global oil markets. Because of the reasons that I mentioned, I mean, first of all, we are going to still need a lot of oil and gas in the future for a very long time to come, and disruptions to oil and gas supply can and will still continue to have a major ability to cause significant economic damage. I think that system could be strengthened by the involvement of those countries that are driving oil consumption growth in the future. I mentioned that one of the key trends in oil and gas consumption is the change in the geographical concentration of oil and gas consumption. So, essentially emerging and developing economies are driving future oil and gas consumption. So it's very important that those countries are involved in oil and gas emergency preparedness. I think we also need to have, independent and reliable market monitoring for oil and gas markets. And I have to say that I think the IEA once again provides a service here with its oil and gas market reports. And emergency preparedness, I think, is essential as well. So the sharing of best practices on emergency response between those countries that have experience and those countries who are relatively inexperienced in emergency preparedness procedures. I think that's going to be very important in the future, given the length of the extent of risks that we face. I can continue to talk about, potential solutions to electricity security, risks to critical minerals and clean energy supply chains, if you like, but maybe I'll let other panelists come in first on traditional risks before we move on?
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Well, we have a lot to talk about critical mineral and electricity security as well. And if time allows, we will come back later. These are also very important questions. And also, thank you for highlighting the importance of oil and gas security. As we transition, we really should not forget about the security of oil and gas, indeed. So thank you very much. And I would like to ask Ms. Nakano the same question to you too.
Thank you so much for the question. I was actually thinking about critical minerals, but maybe we can save that. Shall we save that for later? If I may, okay, well then if I may, because that's been on my mind quite a bit recently, because that's one area that I've already seen very strong continuation from the Biden administration to the new US administration under Donald Trump. Also, the congressional support has been quite consistent, at least from the United States. And I think this is an area where there are many other countries really, share the interest in working together to ensure that the global supply chain becomes more robust and transparent. And so, there are a couple solutions that are, I think, already identified, but perhaps could use further effort. One is the R&D. I think Japan and a couple other economies, including the United States, have been investing quite a bit in the research and development of alternative materials to reduce the requirement for some of the critical minerals that are that have security of supply concern. There's also recycling, R&D towards recycling efforts. And I think actually IEA has been doing an excellent job, really detailing the types of efforts. But recycling is another very important area. I think in that sense, when going forward, when companies design some equipments or components, there probably should be much more to be done in designing so that the mineral recovery and recycle would be easier or will be economically more sustainable and durable. Also, I think the raising money from the private sector and then also from I guess Western economies to be able to invest in critical minerals mining and processing around the world to really diversify the supply chains is a really challenge. And I did mention the role of countries such as Saudi Arabia. Really this, the so-called patient capital, the money that could be, that's not just looking for immediate and short-term return is quite important to be able to make some of these mineral commodity markets to become much more transparent and competitive. And then also, I think on the diplomatic side, the United States government under the Biden administration introduced this multilateral initiative called Mineral Security Partnership. And the idea was to not just, among advanced economies to try to secure, some of the countries are highly dependent for minerals imports, such as Japan, but also the US, Korea. But then there are also countries like Canada that's has a wealth of resources, but also wanted to be part of this multilateral effort to diversify the supply chains. More, in the second year of the MSP, these governments started engaging resource-rich countries to really ensure that this will not look like some sort of a colonization or some sort of just one-sided reach for minerals wealth in the global south and others, and to really try, try to, have sort of a win-win formula. I hope, and I think this partnership is now under the Korea's leadership at the moment. I think the idea is to for these leadership or chairmanship to rotate around the member countries. That's right now 13 countries and EU. But I do think that some of these challenges cannot be tackled by single country. So I think this is one of the potential solutions to the critical mineral supply chain issue. Thank you.
Thank you. It's actually encouraging to hear that in the US there's a strong support both from the government and the Congress to the critical mineral issues. And I'm glad that you highlighted the R&D and recycle for the mineral securities. Indeed, many countries and companies are working on these researches and recycling to make better use of the minerals. The good point about the mineral is that unlike oil and gas, it doesn't disappear if properly recycled. So thank you. And you also highlighted the need for investment and also the international cooperation to diversify the mining and refining. And Japan is very much attached to the importance of the MSP actually. So thank you for raising that point too. And now I would like to turn to Dr. Utama. The same question for you. What kind of solutions we should take to address those challenges? One or two challenges you highlight.
Okay, thanks. The traditional challenges, as mentioned by Graham before, in Southeast Asia, we try to, apart from diversification, we try to collaborate and cooperate. In regard with the collaboration in terms of oil, in the Southeast Asian nation, we have ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation. In short, we call it APAI. This is a 5-cycle policy commitment. It's not really binding commitment because it's consensus kind of strategies. And over there, one of the important things on the oil is try to have sort of the ASEAN petroleum security agreement. In short, we call it APSA. Over there, also discussing the potential of having a common bunker on these, to emerging responses, and in regard with this natural gas, we have sort of a big plan on the Trans-ASEAN Gas Pipeline, TAGP. Right now is already connected around 3,600 kilometers and planning to double it. And on the those are on the fuel part. On the thermal part, in the industrial sectors, we do have energy efficiency strategies. Currently, we achieve already 32% of the energy intensity from 2005 level. So we need to increase those to 35% and also 40% in 2030. Those are the strategies in terms of the fuels and industrial sectors. In regard with the electricity, I think it's quite important to understand, as Nakano-san mentioned, on diversification of the production processes. Currently, we plan to, in the downstream, we try to invest a lot and producing our own, mineral production. But the challenges is still there because of, you may know that China itself having very big subsidy on the clean energy technology, approximately $132 billion US. EU and US around 80, if I'm not mistaken, billion US. So these are big challenges for our regions to compete with that big subsidy in terms of the clean energy. Our economy itself is approximately around 3.7 trillion, which is 132 is 5% of our combined GDP, is huge in China. So those challenges are, I don't want to be pessimistic, but we need to have some sort of understanding to clear projection in the future that if we invest all of this into this technology, so the other sectors will be stalled, we're not really moving forward. So the policymakers try to really careful on looking at these strategies in terms of the clean energy production processes, including the minerals and rare earth production. And looking at our study on the transport sectors, in 2050, if we try to aim to 1.5 degree Celsius scenario, meaning that most of the EVs will be on the street, we have a big challenge in terms of battery productions, in terms of the minerals to battery, because it is showing that we are going to, again, fight over battery minerals. And the battery is only 20% recyclable. So that's the biggest problem right now if we move towards the EV following 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that's why in the region are looking at more on the bioenergy. Indonesia just launched B40 last year, biodiesel 40, and also bioethanol 7%. So I think this region will looking at that potential rather than EV with battery, because we already understood the challenge in the future. It will be same like oil. We have to fight over minerals if we only looking at battery in our transport sectors. So those are the projected challenges and current situation that currently we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think it's a coincidence that you also mentioned petroleum and gas, as Mr. Graham mentioned, the traditional security challenges. And well, it's, I believe, particularly important for ASEAN because the energy consumption is going to increase. And then while renewable energy can't be used as dispatchable energy. So for the security, these are important sources. And also, I'm glad that you mentioned the energy efficiency because, you know, as a solution, and we can't really discuss the whole picture without consumption side. We cannot only talk about the demand side, but we have to look at the consumption side. So thank you for raising the energy efficiency, and we call it as a first fuel as well. So it's an important part. And also, thank you. And your point about technology is really telling. And I would like to come back to this clean technology challenges and why it's relevant to energy security in my second question. So thank you for pointing that out. And now I would like to turn to Dr. Yanagisawa.
Thank you very much. So yeah, for the realistic solutions for these traditional risks, as all panelists mentioned already, the key is the diversification of the energy sources and the energy supply. And for purely decarbonization, maybe the renewables with no emission would be the best choice. But if we would also consider the energy security and also energy stable supply, renewables still have the issues like fluctuation depending on the weather, transmission to the demand area, and the required critical mineral has issue of the concentration of mining and processing already mentioned. So therefore, it is also Japan to diversify its energy resources, including the fossil fuels. But of course, decarbonization is also really important. So Japan has been and should continue to do the best to mitigate the emission from the fossil fuels like the CCS and the co-firing with the ammonia, and also trying to increase the hydrogen as well. So maybe the combination of the fossil fuels and renewables and also nuclear, and in addition to the mitigation for these traditional fuels would also contributed to the mitigating the traditional risks, geopolitical risks as well, I think.
Thank you. You made it clear that we need to use various technologies. We can't rely on just one or two technologies. And it's also part of diversification that we have to pursue. And so that's actually a new issue under energy transitions, in addition to traditional diversification issues. So thank you very much. And I would like to move to my next question. As I just mentioned, the clean energy technology, we in the presentation in the first part, we heard that the both critical minerals and the clean energy manufacturing, they are geographically concentrated. And as Dr. Yanagisawa stressed, the diversification is a key for energy security. But this may be a tricky question, but unlike, say, oil and gas, maybe you could elaborate more on how, why, and why these technologies and minerals are relevant for energy security. I mean, when you talk about EV, these are important for energy transitions, of course. And why are they relevant to energy security? And maybe you could elaborate more on those points. And because you are nodding, I'd like to Ms. Nakano first, and then I would like to ask for volunteers, maybe Mr. Graham or Dr. Utama may have something to add. So please.
Thank you so much. Actually, so it's a very good point. A good question, and I almost feel like I might be stealing some of the really key insights that many of the IEA experts have been sharing for the last couple of years. But when it comes to critical minerals, they're often, for example, let's take the transportation sector. If it's critical minerals, they're often part of the infrastructure. So in other words, you don't have to have a continuous supply, to be able to, drive or get your electric vehicles going. Whereas, if it's a internal combustion engine based vehicles, the fuel, the gasoline or diesel, they're much more subject to ongoing potential volatility and price levels in the oil markets. So I think the security, how you look at it is like sort of a stock versus flow. One is much more continuous supply, and so it does really give you the option. It gives you really the profile of resources are much more diversified, and I think the same goes for things like wind towers, all these minerals that are part of the wind power generation plants. They're now part of the infrastructure. So versus could be natural gas based. But I'm not saying that for that reason once the one path solves the entire thing. It's just it gives you more options, different ways that you can sort of complement the different physical and physical natures of technologies and resources. Mm-hmm. And please jump in and elaborate or correct.
No, well, thank you very much. Thank you that makes it clearer where the issues are. And so I would like to ask maybe other panelists, how do you describe these issues as energy security issues vis-a-vis industrial policy issues? Say when we talk about EVs, it's about manufacturing of cars, and how do you compare the say critical mineral security and the critical clean energy manufacturing issues, whether it's energy security issue or industrial policy issue, or maybe a mix of both? Yes, please.
Sorry, Graham, can I do first? Yeah, I think that's very interesting question. One of very good example happening in the region is that ASEAN Power Grid, we have studied on the 18 potential interconnection. And apart from that, we have some sort of other bilateral interconnection potential. For example, Sarawak to Singapore. Sarawak is the northern part of Malaysia. If you're looking at Borneo, Kalimantan Island, the other part, the upper part is the Malaysia area. Those are Sarawak, connected to Singapore. They've done a study on approximately around 700 kilometers. If it is happening, then the submersible cable required almost all of the regional copper at that time. All of the production of the copper will be stopped to focusing on this cable. And another question is that, are we going to use clean energy to produce those cables? Very valid question. And the answer is none of these current clean energy can provide the same amount of energy to provide those industrial processes. So again, if we only looking at clean energy, without looking at how this transition going, all have to be clean, all have to be green, then nothing happen. Because the importance of APG is that when we have this interconnectivity, we can increase the RE, especially from VRE, the variable RE. The VRE required a stable grid, massive grid, and including those, the battery storage. If we don't have a upgraded grid, infrastructure itself is not really advanced, forget about VRE will be introduced. It happened also in Vietnam. When the grid is not really mature, they increased 19 gigawatt in a matter of one or 2 years, 2019, 2020. What happened the next year was blackout. Because the grid is not really stable, they do not have enough capacity, and it's not connected. So to avoid those problems, before it's like chicken and egg, what come first? But now we understand that infrastructure is come first, regardless the energy coming from. So that's what happened right now in the region. So yeah, I can stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that example. That's very clear that infrastructure is very important for that matter. And maybe Mr. Graham, do you have any comments, or do you like to jump in?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I can echo a lot of the sentiments that have been expressed so far. I mean, obviously, regards critical minerals, minerals, copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, rare earth elements, they're really essential for many of the production of many of the clean energy technologies that I mentioned in my presentation, and many of the panelists have mentioned. Wind turbines, electricity networks, electric vehicles, they all require and depend on, the availability and the security of these critical minerals. Obviously the types of critical minerals that are used vary on the technology. If you take lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese and graphite, they're crucial to battery performance. If we take rare earth elements, we need those for permanent magnets used in wind turbines and also for EV motors. And then if we talk about, I talked about the increasing demand for electricity. And if we want to expand electricity grids and electricity networks, we need huge amounts of aluminium, copper. So, these critical minerals and these clean energy technologies are extremely essential to both our efforts in terms of progressing the energy transition and enhancing energy security in terms of reducing our supply potentially on imported fossil fuels. Just to mention, some of the solutions. I mean, we know the problem about critical minerals and clean energy supply chains is that, it's mainly around supply concentration. So I think if I just look at some of the solutions around critical minerals first, I think the reality is that on the supply side, finding some finding solutions is really difficult. It's really difficult to finance new critical minerals processing capacity, partially because the long-term price outlook is so uncertain. Governments can provide subsidies, they can provide tax credits, and international cooperation through bilateral or multilateral agreements, regional partnerships, and things like guaranteed offtake agreements. They can facilitate investment and reduce associated risks with new projects. But ultimately, critical mineral supply chains and clean energy supply chains are likely to remain concentrated for the foreseeable future. But I think some of the panelists have talked about the importance of the demand side, and that is really, really important. It's not all just about the supply side. And on the demand side, there is plenty that we can do with regard to critical minerals. There's a lot that we can do to reduce our consumption of critical minerals and reduce our exposure to supply shocks in that way. There's a lot of IEA literature on this, but demand for critical minerals can be reduced by more efficient battery pack design. And it was also mentioned before, about the ability to improve our ability to recycle critical minerals. And I think recycling is particularly important because it effectively creates a secondary supply source that reduces the reliance on new mines. For clean energy manufacturing, as I mentioned during my presentation, maybe the biggest factor that has led to a large concentration in the production of clean energy manufacturing technologies is that gap in the cost of production in China versus other parts of the world. It's much more expensive to build a clean energy manufacturing plant in Japan, in the United States, than it is in China. So in terms of measures that can be taken to reduce that production cost gap, I think, again, financial incentives can certainly help. That could be in the form of capital expenditure support, or that would be in the form of tax credits or loan guarantees, for example, and also support with operating costs, such as ongoing production tax credits. Those can help. And maybe more fundamentally, if we want to attract clean energy manufacturing, that can be assisted by having markets that offer political stability, by having a skilled workforce, by having an attractive regulatory environment, and so on. That will clearly put economies in a better position to encourage the manufacturing of these new energy technologies.
Thank you very much. Thank you for elaborating on why these clean energy technologies and the critical minerals are critical and essential for the clean energy. And also you stressed the importance of financial incentives, and Ms. Nakano also mentioned about the need for investment more, especially on critical minerals. And we hear a lot of those, and it is actually very important, and very important both because we not only have to diversify the supply sources, but also we need to increase the supply of, when it comes to minerals and also clean energy technology as well. And so, Dr. Yanagisa, would you like to comment on this topic?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, as I mentioned and discussed already, ideologically and basically it had better pursued by companies for its own strategy, but uncertainty and also the risks, especially the geopolitical risks, are really increasing. So it is beyond the capability by the companies or business strategy. So maybe as mentioned and pointed out, that the governmental support, like a financial or insurance, would also really be beneficial for the companies to do the activity for such kind of the clean technology. So maybe and also the concept had been seen in the Japan US summit joint statement as well. So maybe such kind of the political and governmental support would also be really important, I think.
Thank you. Indeed, the public, private, or government and the private sector cooperation, collaboration is essential because energy security is a matter of national security, so the government has to play its role for sure. So thank you for pointing that out. And before moving to the Q&A session, I would like to ask last question to the panelists. We talked a lot about international cooperation as well. You mentioned MSP, and also Dr. Utama talked about the ASEAN regional approach as well. And so I would like to ask you, what kind of international cooperation is needed in addition to what you have already mentioned to advance the energy security in energy transitions? So maybe I will start with maybe, I don't know, Mr. Graham, and then in that order. So Mr. Graham.
Sure, thank you. I mean, maybe it won't surprise you, me coming from the IEA to say that, I think international cooperation is absolutely vital to ensure the security of global energy supply as energy transitions evolve. I think, of course, the IEA, the origins of the IEA are rooted in the need for international cooperation, and particularly to respond effectively to major oil supply disruptions. And the IEA oil emergency system remains possibly one of the most successful and practical examples of international cooperation regarding energy security issues. IEA countries have effectively joined forces to make available to the oil market additional supplies on 5 separate occasions since the founding of the IEA in 1974, with the most recent example being in 2022. And we continue to promote, international cooperation on oil security through the emergency response exercises that I mentioned in my presentation, through a dedicated committee that we have in the IEA, which focuses on the cooperation around oil security and emergency preparedness. And we think that some of the lessons that we've learned from international cooperation on oil security in the IEA could also be useful, as we seek to enhance cooperation around critical mineral security as well. And that's why, IEA countries are seeking to develop this critical minerals security program. And that program will likely involve cooperative efforts to, undertake market analysis and monitoring of critical mineral supply, as well as cooperation around potential collective responses to any critical minerals supply disruptions that might occur. With regard to electricity, I would say that, of course, collective responses to market disruptions, can't be developed or enacted. They don't work in the same way as they would for oil supply or maybe even critical mineral disruptions. But again, international cooperation can be very useful in enhancing electricity security, because many countries are going through the same types of challenges, of trying to meet vastly growing electricity demand, of trying to increase flexibility options, and trying to ensure reliability of their electricity systems as those systems transform. So the sharing of best practices around those issues can be very useful in an international setting. And that's why actually the IEA has just created an electricity task force, which will be heavily focused on enhancing the security of electricity supply. Another area that perhaps we haven't touched upon yet during this discussion so far is around energy access. So access to reliable and affordable energy, and that's, of course, the fundamental element of energy security. Today, I think it's around 750 million people globally don't have access to reliable electricity. And I think here again, international cooperation has a big role to play, particularly concerning efforts to sort of mobilize the necessary finance and to accelerate progress on global energy access.
Thank you. Indeed, the IEA's role is becoming more important as we move not only from the oil and gas transition security, but electricity security and critical minerals. And thank you for pointing out the energy access. That's actually very important as part of the area for international cooperation and for the global energy security. So, Ms. Nakano.
Thank you so much. I actually have two things on my mind, if I may. I will try to be concise, but one is that resources such as hydrogen and ammonia, it has a great potential to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions from in the sectors that are hard to electrify and reduce emissions. So in that type of areas, the supply chains are still being developed. So that should be one of the areas where governments can start collaborating so that the future global supply chains for technology components that are key for the hydrogen economy will not look like, will not be as geographically concentrated the way EV batteries or solar panels have become today. And that could take the form of multilateral, more of a R&D exchange, perhaps, on things like electrolyzers that are much more compatible with variable renewable energies such as PEM, proton exchange membrane, as opposed to alkaline. Sorry, not to be too technical, but so that could be one thing to keep in mind. The other thing I wanted to mention is absolutely, I think we're entering the age of electricity, and I noticed that in the most recent issue of the Foreign Affairs magazine, Daniel Yergin and some of his co-authors actually discuss how it's actually energy addition, not energy transition, that may be the challenge that we're facing. And the basic concern that the authors suggest is that because of this strong energy demand coming from the artificial intelligence and also data centers, the whole pie itself is expanding. So it's not just a matter of trying to introduce more clean energy resources, but to be able to really and therefore transition the profile, but it's also to have to meet the new energy requirement that's not just coming from the desire to electrify and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So I think in that sense, there could be much more collaboration going forward, trying to understand more about the energy requirements that are arising from these advanced technologies like AI, but also more collaboration to better appreciate how the AI could be applied to be able to maybe better manage intermittency of different energy resources, or transmission system, how to, in that sense, how to try to improve the energy access challenges, perhaps even, mapping different weather patterns, etc., to appreciate the solar potential, wind potential. So I think, to some extent, AI can be part of the solution, but as well as sort of something that we need to better appreciate because it is also driving the electricity demand. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. It's indeed a very important and rapidly emerging issue, this AI's requirement of huge energy demand, and also how we can address it while not undermining the energy transition. And the concept of energy addition is very interesting, but probably alarming. And so thank you for bringing that up. And also the supply chain of new fuels like hydrogen and ammonia. Indeed, countries like Japan rely on import for those clean new fuels as well, not only gas and oil. So the supply chain security also matters for those fuels too. And so Dr. Utama, may I ask the same question, international cooperation?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. If we talking about the fossil fuel or hydrocarbon, I do agree with Graham that international global cooperation is very, very important and urgently needed. But in regard with the renewable energy, I think we all understand that renewable energy is totally depending on the sources itself. And these sources are various in one place to another. Just give an example on the bioenergy. In this more specific is the bioethanol. We did study on the bioethanol resources, and we understood that the byproducts are the same, for example, bioethanol, but the sources are different. First generation of bioethanol can coming from cassava, also can coming from the sugarcane, molasses, or sweet sorghum, for example. These are having different location. So in Southeast Asia, Malaysia is strong with the sweet sorghum. Thailand is the sugarcane and so on. So this cooperation should be looking at the potential itself, should be strengthened. Bioethanol can replace gasoline definitely, but if we have this global cooperation, will be very, very challenging because it's too broad. But regional cooperation with the same interests and same resources availability is definitely very important to understand the strength of the resources as well as how to trade in terms of the technology lesson learned and optimize the land utilization, because generally those will be competing with the water and food and vis-a-vis the land itself. So how to optimize those, I think is very important. And we can also understand the other region. For example, with Brazil, they are very successfully done with this Land Act in 1970, meaning that the source of bioethanol cannot compete anymore. They don't compete anymore with the food, for example. Those kind of lesson learned can be really make the intergovernmental kind of integration and coordination very, very efficiently. And in regard with this, I do agree with Nakano-san on the energy addition. Definitely there's something that currently we are facing, not because of the AI, but definitely our demand are growing very fast. It is projected that the region demand is growing 3 to 4 folds up until 2050, meaning we cannot looking at only how to transition the current energy supply, but the addition of this is 4 times. So this is something that regional cooperation is important, looking at, of course, our various resources that are available in the region, to optimize those with specific challenges. For example, geothermal, they have their own issues and challenges. Hydropower, they have the issues and challenges. Even hydropower is quite interesting. Laos, PDR, GMS, basically Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Great Mekong sub-region have a big potential of hydro. In the same potential with Kalimantan and Malaysia and Sumatra, but typically are 2 different kind of hydro type. One is runoff, the other are reservoir type. So these 2 different things that perhaps need to be addressed in terms of what are the best technology to convert this into battery storage, for example. How to combine this with the other VRE, wind and solar PV, and so on. Those are the very, very unique characteristic happening in specific region, and understanding those need to have, of course, cooperation, collaboration, and the cooperation, collaboration need to understand the localities. the condition happening in this sub-region. Electricity is another thing. Our APG is designed based on the continental energy planning, but those cannot reach beyond Kalimantan, Java, and Sumatra, because the other 30%, Philippines and the east of Indonesia, are island. We cannot use this continental type into this island type. It will be disastrous if we use that, because the challenge of this, you can't really connect all island with submersible cable. As I mentioned previously, submersible is very, very challenging in terms of the production and investment. And we going to use the same like Europe, for example, then it will be very disastrous happening in Southeast Asia. So again, regional cooperation is important to understand first regionality and understand the locality. Then we can brought up into the international collaboration in terms of the lesson learned and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. You repeated the words optimize, and I think that was really captures your point of, say, importance of locality and then, say, optimal solution for each condition of each regional countries. Thank you so much. And so, Dr. Yanagisawa.
So as other panelists mentioned that actually that there are hard to abate sectors for the decarbonization requires a heat, and also there is each country has the different conditions for the energy access. So maybe the various pathways or realistic pathways for the energy transition is needed. So I would also like to introduce the another international cooperation in addition to the ASEC already mentioned. There are also the international cooperation for the clean for the LNG, and this is a coalition for the LNG emission abatement toward net zero, which try to mitigate the GHG emissions in the LNG value chain by both the LNG producing countries and also the consuming countries, including Japan and other Asian countries. So I believe such kind of the cooperation between the producing and the consuming countries contribute to the global energy security as well. And so such kind of the international cooperation I expect to increase globally for the realistic energy transition and energy security. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Indeed, we should not forget about abatement, the mitigation part. When we have to look at the whole picture of energy transition and energy security. So thank you for highlighting that point too. And with that, I would like to move on to the question and answer session with the audience. And first, I would like to invite those people participating in the room for questions. And maybe you, those who want to raise questions could identify who your question is addressed to if you want a specific panelist to answer. Otherwise, we will take questions to maybe one or two of all panelists. So please.
Thank you, Dr. Nishimura. My name is Hiroshi Hashimoto from Institute of Energy Economics, Japan, working with Takafumi. My question is to Mr. Graham of IEA. Most of other security issues and factors have been taken care of during this great seminar. But I'd like to ask him whether IEA has specific countermeasures or mitigation measures against cyber risks. As you mentioned, as Mr. Graham mentioned in his presentation, cyber risks are increasing along with digitalization and electrification. Any specific measures considered by IEA or yourself? Or is this going to be one of the issues to be taken care of, by the newly created electricity task force? This is my question. Thank you.
I would like to invite Mr. Graham to respond.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for this very important question. Yeah, and I think I agree with the sentiment of the question. I think the risks to energy infrastructure from threats like cyber attacks are growing. It's clear that these, as I mentioned in my presentation, that the frequency of major cybersecurity incidents has increased, and these can have major consequences. I think obviously cyber threats are going to increase because of increased digitalization across the energy sector, and also because cyber threats are becoming more sophisticated. In terms of there are no specific set response measures within the IEA to respond to cyber issues, and this will certainly be something which will be covered during the electricity a task force. That'll certainly be an element of their work. But obviously, cyber threats, go beyond the electricity sector as well. What I would say is, in relation to enhancing, protection against cyber threats, we have looked at, giving various policy advice, and I think, things like setting clear requirements and standards for infrastructure owners, energy infrastructure owners, and operators is something that's very important for all governments to take into account with regards to cybersecurity. We also need to create mechanisms for sharing best practices on cybersecurity. And AI was mentioned, and we need to look into both the threats from AI, but also how AI can be used to identify cyber threats. And I think another crucial element is that within the public sector and within the energy sector as a whole, when it comes to cybersecurity, we have a skills shortage. We maybe don't have the people with the skills that we need to detect and deter these cyber threats. So I think governments need to look at how to get those people in place to protect critical energy infrastructure, and how to provide any necessary support to enhance cybersecurity knowledge across a variety of stakeholders in the energy sector.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. We are starting to run out of time, but we can take one or two more questions. And if no, so well, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Akira Yamamoto from J-Power, Japanese power company. I would like to ask also that to Mr. Graham and also the Dr. Utama, and yes, that we need to do something about to secure energy supply. And what do you think about cost of securing energy supply, and what is the cost of enhancing energy security? So if that cost is too high, that will hurt the affordability to not only for the emerging or developing economies, but also for the advanced economies. That will maybe the administration may lose the support from the people. So what do you think about the cost of securing energy supply?
Very important question. Mr. Graham, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost of preventative measures is obviously extremely high. If we go back to the case of oil security, if we think about oil stock holding, it's a very high cost if you're building up an emergency stock holding reserve from scratch. That can cost billions of dollars. And obviously, as we look into the future, we have to meet future energy demand, and that will involve a very high cost in terms of investment in additional electricity production, in particular, and also in expanding grid capacity. All that comes at a significant cost. But at the end of the day, we need to meet that additional demand. And then in terms of measures around, mitigating things like cybersecurity risks, in terms of mitigating things like, the impacts of extreme weather, those come at a high cost as well, those preventative measures. But obviously, the impact of potential supply disruptions can be extremely severe. Oil supply disruptions can cause untold damage in terms of, impacting inflation. If there is a major electricity supply disruption, we've seen many of those across the world, many examples in the United States, and in recent years, and many of those examples were as a result of infrastructure, both gas infrastructure and electricity infrastructure, not being as prepared for extreme weather events as might have been ideal. And so the impact of that in terms of economic damage, but also human damage, was very, very severe. Lives were lost. So I think the cost is certainly high of being prepared for energy security impacts and emergency events, but also the cost of these events when we are not prepared is also extremely high. So certainly it's a balance.
Thank you, Dr. Tama.
Yeah, I do agree with you. The cost is very, very important. And if we're looking at our plan, the Trans-Asian Gas Pipeline, is also very costly. That's why the AGP is not really moving anywhere because of these costs associated, including the stockpiling, the bunkering, the upside itself is rather difficult to move forward because who's going to bear the cost? Who's going to responsible for providing the investment in terms of the bunker itself? Whether we're going to borrow bunker from Indonesia or Malaysia or Singapore, who's going to sacrifice for that? That kind of thing are being discussed. Not only just, okay, we agree to cooperate, we agree to have some sort of understanding to reduce the potential of the risks if the oil is depleted, or there are some cases in Middle East, then we can rely on this stockpile. But again, the cost is still something that currently we discuss heavily. In the power sector, also having similar issues. For example, the Thai and Malaysia interconnection. Currently, we have Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore successfully sending electron from hydropower in Laos, approximately around 26.5 gigawatt in the last 2 years. And it was still discontinued because Singapore want to increase another 100 megawatt. But the problem of this interconnection between Thailand and Malaysia, they are still arguing who's going to invest on this upgrading the interconnection transmission. Again, this is our very serious matters. If we want to really provide energy security, not only transition, the cost is going to the transition itself, but also the cost for providing the infrastructure is definitely challenging. Not to mention what happened with the MDBs, the development banks. Their policy are very clear. They cannot provide, the energy which relate with fossil fuels. That's becoming another bottleneck. So meaning that the region need to understand how to get, another financial resources. That's why we're talking about Sukuk, the Islamic financial scheme. We're talking about government bond. We're talking about blended finance, PPP, one of those. So this kind of discussion are still happening right now. And again, we have also to understand, if looking at the power sectors, it is single market kind of scheme, not like liberalized, market. A liberalized market is very rather easy to, okay, as long as there are business deal, then easy to invest in the of transition. But in the single market is very, very challenging to proceed this kind of, problem.
Thank you very much. We could keep going because it's a very important and interesting topic, and then all the panelists brought in very insightful and stimulating discussion to the table. but the time is running up. Actually, the IEA is going to cover those topics in April in the summit for 2.5 days. And we tried to cover the same topic in 2.5 hours. So it was, it was probably too ambitious, but thank you everyone and all the panelists for very interesting and insightful discussions. And we could continue discussing in various fora on those important topics, and your inputs were very valuable. So thank you very much, and I would like to invite the audience to join me for applauding to those panelists. Thank you very much.
With that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to conclude today's seminar. Participants online and participants on site, thank you very much for your engagement.